At 6 o'clock, Labour in turmoil. A minister and 6 junior members of the government resigned over the leadership crisis. Tony Blair's reply, it's disloyal, discourteous, wrong, and a return to Labour's bad old days. But where's the Chancellor? The Prime Minister's allies accuse Gordon Brown of organising a coup.
They may be scheming and plotting at Westminster, but what about the rest of the country? I've taken to the skies to test the temperature away from the political hothouse.
Also on tonight's programme, Britain's deadly mission in Afghanistan. Another soldier killed, 5 others seriously injured. The first pictures as an adult. The Austrian woman held hostage for 8 years breaks her silence to speak out. The present that Santa will not be lugging around this Christmas, PlayStation 3.
Oh no! What? What? They've rolled it back. They always do that.
And I'm in Birmingham looking at the impact of more than 50,000 Eastern Europeans coming to the Midlands to work for the 3rd day in our series on the changing face of Britain.
Later in the hour, I'll have all the sport, including Andy Murray's out of the US Open after losing in 4 sets to Davydenko, and Scotland are in Euro 2008 action against Lithuania 0-0.
Good evening and welcome to the 6 o'clock news. Accusations of a coup, a wave of resignations and opponents rubbing their hands with glee. The Labour Party's leadership crisis reached new heights today with a minister and 6 other members of the government resigning and calling for Tony Blair to do the same. The Prime Minister's only reply, he would have sacked the minister anyway, accusing him of being disloyal, discourteous and wrong. Our political editor Nick Robinson is in Downing Street now. Nick.
George, speculation, tittle-tattle, mischief-making by the media. That's how, for weeks, for months, people in Downing Street have dismissed questions from the media about when Tony Blair will go. Not now, not today. Now they talk of a plot by Gordon Brown and his supporters to get their man out and him into number 10.
Will Tony Blair, like Margaret Thatcher, be forced out of office not by the electorate but by his own party? His supporters claim that Gordon Brown is behind what they call an attempted coup, a coup they're determined will fail. The man claimed to be organising the plot was a defence minister until this morning, when he resigned. Tom Watson had signed a letter from those calling themselves utter Labour loyalists and implacable modernisers, calling on their leader to stand aside. With him were 6 ministerial aides: Chris Mole, Ian Lucas, Khalid Mahmood, Wayne David, David Wright and Mark Tammy. They too resigned their government positions today. Mr Watson's resignation letter to Tony Blair stated, "I no longer believe that your remaining in office is in the interest of either the party or the country." Tony Blair's reply was stinging. He accused his accuser of being disloyal, discourteous and wrong. The Commons may still be on holiday, but the pace of events in Westminster has been dizzying, with others queuing up to join the assault on Tony Blair, many well-known supporters of Gordon Brown.
The Prime Minister has to announce at an appropriate moment, if he was going along this course, sometime in the autumn, to allow the procedures for the election of a new leader to begin before Christmas and perhaps be completed in early spring.
Gordon Brown's not been seen or heard in public for days. His aides deny he's plotting, but today he slipped out of Downing Street's back door without yet coming to his leader's aid.
I think we're on the edge of a political abyss here, and I think it's up to the Chancellor now, Gordon Brown, to try and steady the ship a little bit. Only he can do it, and he should be on the phone to Tony Blair and vice versa, and I think that's what the party in the country demands.
It's only 16 months since the electorate invited the Blairs to carry on living in Downing Street. The question now is whether they'll have to move out in half that time or even less. The Prime Minister's allies are digging in.
This is 17 people, many of whom I count as my friends, but on this they're wrong. And I'm afraid 17 people can't can't blackmail the most successful Prime Minister that we've ever had to go as they've demanded immediately. I mean, that's not stable and that's not orderly.
Which is good news for at least one person.
We've got a government that is falling apart and fighting each other. We need an end to this uncertainty. We need it quickly. And above all, we need a government that can provide strong and positive leadership for our country's future.
A close friend of both Tony Blair and Gordon Brown says the chemistry has collapsed. The question tonight is, can they rediscover it, if only in the interests of political self-preservation? Nick Robinson, BBC News, Westminster.
So, does this turmoil in the Labour Party matter to anyone outside of Westminster? Our political correspondent James Hardy has travelled around the country to find out.
MPs are miles from here, away on their summer holidays, but the tentacles of political intrigue have a long reach. They may be scheming and plotting at Westminster, but what about the rest of the country? I've taken to the skies to test the temperature away from the political hothouse. Across the Severn Bridge to Cardiff. In Wales, Labour's facing defeat in Assembly elections next May and the party's jittery. I'm here to meet a local MP who sympathises with calls for Mr Blair to quit. A number of MPs, I mean some say the majority of Welsh MPs, want Tony Blair to go soon. Why is that?
Well, we have elections here in May. You know, this question of ample time for changeover and transition. Well, we have urgency here because we have these elections in May, and it is quite possible Labour will lose control of Wales and of Scotland. So the view from London is very different than the view from Wales.
Across Britain, the political landscape does seem gradually to be changing. A number of MPs from the West Midlands challenge Mr Blair to go, so are they reflecting the views of their voters? One place to ask people is West Bromwich, home of the rebel, now ex-minister, Tom Watson.
He should go now because the Labour government ain't going to win another election now, I think, because they've done the dirty work now.
No, I don't think he should go now. I think he should hang on and do his work. He's a good lad.
No, he should never go until he has to retire, because I think he's great. He's a great man.
And what of the voters in Mr Blair's heartland? Are the people of Sedgefield tiring of him yet? Here at Trimdon Labour Club, as you'd expect, they're 100% behind their local MP.
These stories really need to be nipped in the bud now. They've got to stop. If they've got grouses, they should go to the Parliamentary Labour Party. That's where they should be airing their views.
Outside on the streets, though, it's not so cut and dried.
The majority of people in Sedgefield would be glad to see him go. That's my opinion.
He's doing all right as far as we're concerned, so the longer he's there, the better.
No flying survey like this can claim to be scientific, but the uncertainty about Mr Blair in the Westminster Village does seem to echo across the country. James Hardy, BBC News.
And back now to Nick Robinson in Downing Street. Nick, in your report you talked about Gordon Brown plotting a coup. That's an extraordinary allegation.
It is an extraordinary allegation, but it's made again and again. Now, the people involved are not exactly household names, except perhaps, George, in their own households. But the minister who resigned today used to work in the Treasury as the whip, the man who got government business through. That, we're told, is significant. We're told that the fact that Gordon Brown's silent and yet his aides are constantly briefing the media, that, we're told, is significant. We're told that the people who come on TV and radio to call for the Prime Minister to go sooner rather than later are old friends of Gordon Brown is significant too. Mr Brown and his allies angrily deny any allegation of plotting. They privately say it's the Prime Minister's fault, all this. He got the whole thing running. And they say that the Chancellor would come to his aid if only there was a sensible way of dealing with this and if people around Tony Blair didn't plot desperately to get anybody in other than Gordon Brown. Both sides pour poison into the media's ears about the other.
Nick, by any standard, this has been a dramatic 24 hours. Where now?
Well, I think there are two questions for two groups of people tonight. Those who have tried to force the Prime Minister out have to now decide whether they're going to go for the kill. Will there be others beyond this minister, beyond these 6 ministerial aides? Will there be senior ministers willing to do it? If not, are they ready to pull back for the sake of party unity? A question, though, for Tony Blair and his aides too. Will they finally abandon the search for anyone but Gordon and work with Mr Brown for the good of their party? No one I speak to knows the answer to either question.
Nick, thank you.
So Gordon Brown, as you can see, arriving in Glasgow and just turned up at the school, and he's got several engagements this afternoon. Looking quite cheerful and happy as he turned up. But whether he decides ultimately to say something meaningful about what's going on at Westminster is quite another matter. There's a lot of pressure on Mr Brown too. We focused on the pressure on Mr Blair, of course, to say something, and that's beyond dispute, but there's intense pressure on Mr Brown as well, because there's a great responsibility on his shoulders, according to lots of MPs, to try to sort out what's going on and to dampen down this sense of crisis. Gordon Brown, of course, who was spotted yesterday leaving Downing Street in his car, having had two, by all accounts, quite difficult meetings with the Prime Minister about precisely what was to happen today. But no word from him. He's not broken his silence yet on this, and of course he's been understandably maybe reluctant to comment on this publicly for some time. And Mr Brown's supporters even today saying that it's going to be very difficult to resist the pressure to say something. One of them hinting to me earlier that in those difficult meetings yesterday with Mr Blair, they may actually have come to some agreement, that Mr Blair would say today that this was his last party conference this year, without going into more timing details, and that Mr Brown would kind of signal that he was happy with that general statement, but that behind the scenes they may well have come to some more precise agreement. Well, now, as we look at these images of Gordon Brown, the man, of course, who's widely expected to be Tony Blair's successor, let me bring in our political editor, Nick Robinson, who's actually in North London, waiting for Mr Blair to turn up there. But Nick can join us while we're looking at these pictures. Nick, what is your view on what's likely now to happen this afternoon? Because, as you said earlier, it's been a very, very confusing morning.
It's been confusing, Hugh, and I think some people think there's a deal, but there isn't a deal, there's a panic. Tony Blair and Gordon Brown have decided that yesterday was a disaster for them both separately and mutually, and for their party. And the message they hope to get across to the party is, for God's sake, pull together and do the electorate's work and get down to governing. The question, of course, is whether there is any reality lying as foundations underneath that rhetoric. And there isn't that much, as far as I can tell. I expect Gordon Brown not to comment on the timetable when he speaks to reporters in Glasgow, merely to confirm his desire that there should be, in that awful overused phrase, a stable and orderly transition. I expect the Prime Minister to be vague about the timetable, talking of going by next summer. And behind the scenes, the real work still has to be done, which is when precisely does he go, with people still asking, look, if he can go next May after local elections, after elections for the Scottish Parliament and Welsh Assembly, why on earth not get rid of him before then to help Labour's electoral chances? And the other conversation going on with the Brownites desperately wanting Tony Blair to essentially endorse their man as his successor and to work with him, so that all decisions about the future of policy and the future of party machinery
that you're all
are
very
mutually
interested
agreed.
in the UK school games and what we're doing, and I'm delighted to be here because I'm going to be meeting some of the volunteers, as I've just done, with Dick Cameron, Patricia Ferguson, with Steve Redgrave, but also, of course, meeting some of the people who are going to be future Olympic athletes for our country. And this is the principal reason for my visit here. But I thought I should say something else to you. We're in a unique situation in our country where the Prime Minister has said, as he has said on a number of occasions, that he does not want to lead our party and our government into the next general election. And of course, as a result of that, there are questions about what happens in the time to come. And it's right to say that I, like others, have had questions myself. But I want to make it absolutely clear today that when I met the Prime Minister yesterday, I said to him, as I've said on many occasions to him, and I repeat today, that it is for him to make the decision. I said also to him, and I make clear again today, that I will support him in the decisions he makes, that this cannot and should not be about private arrangements, but what is in the best interests of our party, and most of all, the best interests of our country. And I will support him in doing exactly that. Tony Blair and I have worked together for 20 years, and we've done so in difficult times as well as in very good times. And we continue to work together because we share a determination both of us, that we will advance and get down to the business of a Labour government and doing our best by the people of the country. And I'm determined that in the months and years to come, we continue to do our duty by the people of Britain. And it is my determination and his to do that that will influence everything that happens in the times to come.
Have you reached agreement on when he will go?
Nothing else today, but thank you very much.
Have you reached agreement on when Tony Blair will go, Mr. Brown?
Gordon Brown, well, that's the statement we've been waiting for, and it was pretty clear, Mr. Brown saying that it is for Mr. Blair to decide how and when he leaves Downing Street.
More headroom, please.
That he supports Mr. Blair as Prime Minister, and that the important thing is to focus on the work of government and achieving the goals that New Labour set out, not just in 1997, but in 2001 and in 2005. So I think what you'd characterise as a supportive statement. I hope we can talk to Nick Robinson again. Nick, what did you make of it?
Well, if you were a naive person, you'd wonder what the media were making a fuss about. But of course, watching this programme, you're not naive. Gordon Brown is saying what he has to say, that this is a decision for the Prime Minister. He'll back him, whatever the Prime Minister wants to do, and they've got to get on with the job. The truth is, that is a formula. There's no deal. It might get him through the end of today. It might even get him to the end of next week. But the questions will still remain. How can Tony Blair stay? Should he stay in office? And will Gordon Brown and Tony Blair work together to make that a political success? Or will the poison that's been in their relationship now poison it for good and mean that Tony Blair has to go sooner rather than...
Now, well, there's a bit of excitement, I think, because I think we may be within a few minutes of getting that statement from Mr. Blair, because I understand that he recorded this statement a few minutes ago. So, as I said to you a little while ago, we'll be hoping to get that statement out and into our satellite truck and beamed out, of course, across all of our BBC programmes as soon as we get it. So in the meantime, while we look at these pictures of the school in North London, I'm pleased to say I've been joined by the Labour MP, Stephen Pound. And Stephen Pound, just before we start, let me just say that I understand that in this statement, just recorded, Mr. Blair says that he will leave office within 12 months. The statement that he's just recorded, Mr. Blair now leaving the school in North London. The first word we're getting from the school, before we see the actual recording, is that he will leave office within 12 months. And we'll have the statement for you within a few moments. Here it is.
John, yeah. Prime Minister, there's been a great deal of speculation. Hang on a minute. John, yeah. Prime Minister, there's been a great deal of speculation about your future. Are you ready to put that speculation to rest now?
The first thing I'd like to do is to apologise, actually, on behalf of the Labour Party for the last week, which, with everything that's going on back here and in the world, has not been our finest hour, to be frank. But I think what is important now is that we understand that it's the interests of the country that come first, and we move on. Now, as for my timing and date of departure, I would have preferred to do this in my own way, but as has been pretty obvious from what many of my cabinet colleagues have said earlier in the week, the next party conference in a couple of weeks will be my last party conference as party leader. Next TUC next week will be my last TUC, probably to the relief of both of us. But I'm not going to set a precise date now. I don't think that's right. I will do that at a future date, and I'll do it in the interest of the country and depending on the circumstances of the time. Now, that doesn't in any way take away from the fact it's my last conference, but I think the precise timetable has to be left up to me and to be done in a proper way. Now, I also say one other thing after the last week. I think it's important for the Labour Party to understand, and I think the majority of people in the party do understand, that it's the public that comes first and it's the country that matters, and we can't treat the public as irrelevant bystanders in a subject as important as who is their Prime Minister. So we should just bear that in mind in the way that we conduct ourselves in the time to come. And in the meantime, I think it's important we get on with the business. I mean, I was at a primary school earlier, fantastic new buildings, great new IT suite, school results improving. I'm here at this school that's just in the last few years has come on by leaps and bounds, doing fantastically well. We've got the blockade on the Lebanon lifted today. You know, there are important things going on in the world, and I think I speak for all my cabinet colleagues when I say that we would prefer to get on with those things, because those are the things that really matter and really matter to the country. So it's as I say, it's been a somewhat difficult week, but I think it's time now to move on, and I think we will. Thank you. And I know you've got reams of questions, but I don't think it's very sensible for me to go into them now.
Thanks very much.
Thank you all.
So we have the statement from the Prime Minister at the school in North London. He said very pointedly that he'd have preferred to have done this in his own way, but that's turned out not to have been possible. He said that and confirmed that this Labour Party conference coming up in a few weeks will be his last as Labour leader and Prime Minister. Next week's TUC conference, the same.